Let me start with with a few opening sentences and then turn over to Oshrit because I think the Indian angle of the present crisis since the late February has not been sufficiently noted as we are immersed in the aspects of the Israeli, American, Iranian, Lebanese complexities. At least not here in Israel, but certainly I think it has created some anguish and some concern in India, and if we are joined later by Wang Shuangcheng, we would hear also about the Chinese perspective. Let me say first of all that thinking about the way all of this has affected the structure of the international system and the place of the United States in the international system is reminiscent of the famous apocryphal saying of John Lai, who apparently said or didn't say to Henry Kissinger when he asked him about the French Revolution, it's a bit too early to tell. I've heard explanations that he actually meant the events in France in '68, not in 1789, but still, what happened in the last few months will have a profound effect on the structure of international relations and the international system. But it is much too early to tell where things would actually go. I can offer a few observations. By the way, I did not introduce myself. Colonel retired Dr. Lerman. I'm Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. And this is our attempt to look at the broader consequences and implications of the war and the manner in which the United States and Iran are now trying to settle their differences. Let me turn attention at the beginning to three aspects very quickly. One, the impact of the use of force and what has been demonstrated in terms of military abilities of the United States and Israel acting jointly in an unprecedented manner. It is easy to do, and many people have done in recent weeks, to set aside the military aspect of the conflict and look at at the manner in which Iran has manipulated its grip on the Hormuz Straits and ignore the immense impact of the military operations themselves. But they should not be ignored, and there are lessons to be learned from this, certainly to the members of what I would roughly call the CRINC, the China, Russia, Iran, North Korea alignment. It's not an alliance, as we clearly saw, because they did not line up to help the Iranians, but it is an alignment of forces, and there are lessons to be learned from the military aspect of the events. Secondly, it is clear that the Iranian ability to take hold of the Hormuz Straits and utilize this as a tool of essentially extortion vis-a-vis the United States and the international community generally has been a key aspect of the events that led to the Iranian-American MOU signed virtually by Trump and by the Iranian leadership. And moreover, the justifications, the arguments put forward by President Trump explaining the MOU generated essentially a perception of a slippery slope in which the Iranians have the upper hand, in which they control the future of the international economy, in which unless he stopped the war, Trump said he would have faced the fate of President Hoover from 1929, a very dangerous set of perceptions that I think fed into a sense of hubris on the Iranian side. But very quickly afterwards, and that's my third point, and again, It has to do with the lessons that the international community should be drawing from this sequence of events. The United States turned around and demonstrated through the Israeli-Lebanese MOU, which is far more concrete and specific, that they do not take Iranian dictation, despite this originally the impression originally created by Trump's statements. And so we are now at the point in which some of the initial impressions, very serious and I would say even severe impressions, generated by the American-Iranian MOU and the rationalization offered for it, are now being not entirely, but to some extent corrected through the instrumentality of the Israeli-Lebanese situation, demonstrating that Iran is not in full control of the regional situation or of world affairs. And all of this, I believe, needs to be reflected also in the manner in which the great nations of Asia, India, the largest nation on earth population-wise, the rising power of South Asia, and China, which has taken a problematic position towards Israel throughout the last 3 years, the last 1,000 days of war. Both of them have important stakes in what is happening, and there's none better than our very own Oshrit Birvadker to take us through the Indian position. So over to you, Oshrit.
Thank you, Eran. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me introduce myself. I am a senior fellow at the Jerusalem Institute. I'm also the founder and director of the South and East Asia Center at JISS. And I think, as Eran said, when we look at the recent war between Iran and the United States, I think one thing is clear, is that this war wasn't just a regional crisis. It fundamentally reshaped trade, security, and economic stability all over Asia. So today, as Eran mentioned, I'll speak about and I'll focus on India, which is definitely the region's largest economy, which has been one of the biggest victims of this escalation. And I think that as a net oil importer, India's energy vulnerability has been exposed by this crisis. India imports nearly 90% of its crude oil requirements, and around half of it's actually of its natural gas consumption. So when we talk about India, I think we have to remember that one fundamental reality is that the government has to meet the energy needs of 1.4 billion people. So no doubt that securing affordable and accessible energy is always New Delhi top priority. Another important element I think it's important to mention is India's critical role in the global energy supply chain. So India is, of course, the world's third largest importers of crude oil, the fourth largest importer of LNG, and the second largest importer of LPG. But on top of that, India is also, and this is something that people forget, is also a refining powerhouse. And of course, domestically, it boasted the world's fourth largest refinery capacity and is the fifth largest exporter of refined petroleum products. So this makes India vital and irreplaceable, I think, gear in this global oil energy ecosystem. And naturally, when the crisis is, of course, the price went up and the LNG, I think, shortages felt immediate in India. We saw families and businesses suddenly face a limited cooking gas availability. In some places, it wasn't available. Which was, of course, a major hit to some industries like the restaurant and the hotel industries. Lots of them switched to coal, wood, and electric cookers just to keep the kitchens going in many places. But if you look at the oil ministry in India, they said that they ordered the refineries on 8th of March to maximize the LPG output for household consumption and thereby to lift in the domestic production by about 25%. But again, we have to remember we're living in a social media age, and of course, fake news became also a big part of it. So the panic spread quickly, and that's why we saw all these people waiting and all these long queues. But I think in general, when we look at the Indian energy crisis, the one factor, the one most important variable is actually the LPG availability, which actually has an impact on the Indian society. And this is something we should monitor. And if we look at how India faced this energy crisis, despite this rise in crude oil prices, the government stepped in to stabilize the crude prices. And many of retail oil prices jumped slightly at 7 to 8 rupees per liter since the crisis began. Eventually, when we look at this for about 4 months, Indian household actually saw a very stable fuel prices at the pump. And this was, I think, a remarkable achievement, considering that the conflict was actively disrupting nearly half of the country's energy supply. So I think that also since the crisis, we saw also many experts in India advocating for the expansion of the renewable energy, viewing it not just as a green initiative, but also as something crucial for the strategy for the national security to reduce the long-term exposure to global shocks like we saw last few months. And I think as we also now evaluate this financial fallout of the Hormuz crisis on India, one more thing we need to remember is that the full economic impact of this year has not yet materialized completely if we look at the Indian economy. And of course, it's not the first time that India faced crisis like that, an energy crisis like that. We saw the same thing happening in 2008, 2009, then later in 2012, 2013. But I think today, of course, the Indian government has much more money in its bank account, which definitely gives it a much more a bigger maneuvering space to manage crisis as we saw recently with the Hormuz crisis. Another effect of the rise of the oil prices, which is also important when we look at the Indian economy, is the weakening of the Indian rupee. So over the last 2 months, the rupee has experienced one of its sharpest declines in recent years. Also, of course, we talk about the weakening of the rupee, we talk about the energy, but the result of that is the slowdown in the foreign direct investment, the FDI, and the foreign portfolio investment, the FPI. So as the situation became much more volatile in the region, and we saw that global capital began seeking much more safer places to invest, and I think it's natural, when international investments see energy prices skyrocket and currency like the rupee fluctuate, they naturally become much more cautious about investing in emerging markets. And India is still considering to be an emerging market. And for India, this meant that several major foreign investment inflows were either delayed or scaled back. Investors simply adopted this approach of let's wait and see how the Indian market will adapt to this and how the Indian market will manage the crisis. And as we know, in a growing economy like India, foreign investment is a critical engine for long-term infrastructure project, for a big technology projects. So, when that streams of capital slows, it doesn't just affect the stock market for a few weeks. It actually creates a real drag on future growth capacity. Specifically for a country like India, this is definitely something that is very important. And a result of all of this, we saw a downgrade in India's economic growth forecast. As we saw this Middle East crisis actually intensify. So the foreign capital became pulling back. The immediate shock were felt across the Indian stock markets, but the more alarming signs of economic strain actually came from the central bank itself, from the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI. And they were forced to officially downgrade the GDP growth forecast for the economy, cutting it from 6.9% to 6.6%. And of course, at the same time, we had also inflation that climbed to 5.1%. So that's definitely not good news for the Indian economy. And I think what we saw here with the energy crisis and its impact on the Indian economy is a clear example how this external geopolitical crisis happening 2,000 kilometers away still has and translate into a direct and a very putting a physical brake on India's growth capacity. So that's a great example of how these two regions is still connected and linked, and that the Gulf link is crucial for India's economy. Um, One more aspect which I want to, of course, to mention, and I think it's important because we all remember this, that Prime Minister Modi just concluded a visit, a high-level visit here in Israel, and that momentum so close to the attack itself was actually exposed the government to criticism from opposition, of course, from the public. The proximity and the timing became a lightning rod for the domestic opposition and of course, fueled the media. And almost overnight, social media and parts of the public discourse were actually flooded with this conspiracy theory, and critics begins to questioning whether India had prior knowledge of the attack or whether its foreign policy alignment with Israel was actually shifting too quickly and dragging India into a conflict that it didn't want to be part of. So I think this external noise converted actually directly into pressure inside the Indian parliament. The opposition used the situation to launch a debate attacking the government on two main fronts. First, the questions the India-Israel relationship and the decision to visit Israel itself. And second, they accused the administration of being caught off guard, demanding to know how a conflict that is happening so far from us could actually disturb half of India's energy supply and actually tank the rupee. So for Prime Minister Modi and the Prime Minister's government, this wasn't just a foreign policy challenge. I think it quickly became to something that has a domestic crisis himself, but forcing them to manage the public perception and, of course, the parliamentary scrutiny. But I think they manage it well because it just happened in the early few weeks, but then now I think things stabilized. Another important element of this discussion, I think we can't talk about this war without mentioning the Indian workers in the Gulf. India has roughly 9 million workers in the Gulf, and these workers spans across different sectors from construction to service to retail, hotel, hospitality, you name it. But more importantly, I think when we talk about these migrant workers, we need to remember that each year they send back $50 billion in remittances. So, of course, we cannot ignore a number like that. And at this scale, any fallout from Iran conflict is no longer confined to the Gulf. It actually directs the domestic economy at home, weighing heavily on local consumption, housing markets, and of course, household debt. I read an interesting article about the World Bank estimates, and the economic growth in the Gulf region slowed to just 1.3% in 2026, down from the 4.4% just a year earlier in 2025. So when we look at this, even this numbers, this slowdown has put millions of jobs at risk. I spoke with some international recruiters, and they said that even the hiring process has become highly uncertain because employers are delaying recruitments. And of course, Indian families are feeling very hesitant about paying this upfront fees that they need to pay before migrating to the region. So that's definitely a big thing. And when it comes to the Indian government, there is no official statistic of how many workers have permanently left the Gulf during this crisis. But the Ministry of External Affairs, they stated one number in April, and they say that approximately 1.1 million Indian, including workers and travelers from the region, returned between the beginning of the attack, which was February 28th, till end of April. So I think that gives us some kind of estimation. I think the numbers now are more probably would be 1.5 million. But of course, this massive return of workers, I think if we look at what's happening inside India, couldn't happen in a worse time for New Delhi, because India currently has nearly 400 million people aged between 15 and 29. And generating non-farm jobs for them remains one of the country's main challenge. And of course, today, with the rise of AI and of course, weaker global trade and tighter international immigration rules, that already narrowing the opportunities, the traditional employment opportunities for India. So that's definitely not helping to India's economy. As a result, as well, we saw that the numbers shift. India's overall unemployment rate rose to 5.2% in April, up from 4.9% in Feb. So you can see the numbers, and of course, numbers can never lie. So I think that just shows and prove the effect of this crisis. I think, but the most alarming figure is among the urban youth, where the numbers there are definitely higher. There are 40%. We're talking about 14%. So I think if we look about this crisis, is just not an energy shock that affects the Indian economy, but it's slowly turning into a major domestic employment crisis for India's next generation. Another important element when we talk about this crisis and its effect on India, of course, and I think in our publication we talk about it a lot, about the Pakistan, the P factor, the Pakistan factor. And for years, New Delhi has heavily invested, the diplomatic capital into labeling Pakistan as a state sponsor of terrorism, and of course, working day and night to isolate Pakistan on the international stage. So seeing Islamabad stepping up and positioning itself as a mediator on such a major conflict in this scale, it's a major blow for India. And of course, it's a bitter pill to swallow. But of course, India supported the initiative and the ceasefire agreement, and congratulate them for that. But I think that development, of course, adds to the tension between Washington and New Delhi. Relationship between Washington were already strained following the Sindoor operation, where President Trump took credit for broking in the ceasefire deal, something that New Delhi denied till today. And this friction actually made worse then later we have a ceremony was hosted in the White House, and of course the tariff disagreement. And of course, here and there we saw Donald Trump tweeting some negative tweets on India, and of course the Indians need to manage it. Of course, it had some impact, but I think Indians are just waiting and managing it cautiously, waiting for Trump to end this, his term without causing much damage to the Washington-New Delhi relation. So I think this entire situation has triggered some kind of divide as well in India's strategic and foreign policy community. At the same time, it also gave the opposition a much more powerful weapon to attack the government. Opposition leaders like Rahul Gandhi and Sonia Gandhi, they criticized Prime Minister Modi, framing this as a major foreign policy failure, because the main argument was quite simple. They said that the Modi administration has long positioned itself as this architect of India's global rise, and claiming it successfully built and secured this relationship between New Delhi and Washington. So now the opposition is asking how that same partnership allow India to be sidelined on the global stage, while its main rival Pakistan actually gained this diplomatic leverage. So definitely this crisis put India in a very awkward situation when it comes to its own public, when its own citizens. But I see that there's also a lot of opportunities and not only challenges for India. And one of them is definitely the reviving of the IMEC. When the war disrupt traditional maritime routes, I think it became very clear that the international community desperately need an alternative and secure supply chain. So this bottleneck actually giving India a much more powerful diplomatic opening to push this IMEC to the top of the global agenda, and as they're doing. And New Delhi now is framing it, this corridor, not just as a commercial trade route or just another alternative for the Chinese BRI, but is an absolute geopolitical necessity for the global economic stability. So I think that definitely helped New Delhi gain this momentum again. One important opportunity, important change that happened following this crisis is that actually this crisis upgraded the energy partnership with Washington. So of course, the Hormuz crisis essentially forced India to recalculate its entire long-term energy strategy. And historically, as we know, India heavily relied on the Gulf, and later, of course, we had the cheap Russian oil that they bought. But the fact that Hormuz was closed, I think, and with this tightening U.S. sanction on Russia and Iran, plus this tariff and this tension with the Trump administration, India realized that all of these are just temporary solution, and this was just not enough. So yes, the U.S. Treasury did grant some kind of short-term waivers to India on oil that was already at sea, and this actually gave India some kind of breathing room, even allowing Indian oil companies to buy it first. Iranian oil since 2019. So this actually happened in April. So, but I think as we look at it, even the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, he pointed out that these waivers are going to be temporary. And the Iranian one has already expired, and the Russian one is it's a month-to-month basis, but it was supposed to end by mid-June, so we don't know where it stands right now. India realized that it cannot build its economic future on temporary favors, and it needs a stable long-term partner. And if we look what happened in May, if we look at the number, so U.S. suddenly became India's leading LNG supplier, and India imported almost 1 million tons of American LNG, covering 40% of its needs. And the U.S. also became a top LPG supplier, shipping almost 500,000 tons, which is 60% of what India received from the entire Gulf region that same month. So I think if we look at this energy equation right now, this is a win-win situation, seems to be. Of course, policymakers in Washington support that. And of course, the energy industry, this is, I think, a golden opportunity as well for them to lock this historic partnership, to improve the trust that was ruined during the tariff disagreement. So I think it also helps India to diversify away from this volatile supplier like Russia, like Iran. And of course, it benefits American producers and strengthening this bilateral relationship with a key partner for stability in the Indo-Pacific. So, why not? And of course, we saw, Jay Shankar. I think in one of his quotes, he actually said that he's the relationship, the energy relationship with Washington has improved, and of course, Marco Rubio in his visit to Delhi actually stated the same thing. So the tone is quite similar, and I think that will be a major element of this relationship in the next decade. Which actually started because of this crisis. Another important thing that we look of opportunities for India because of this crisis, I think it gave a major boost for the domestic defense industries. The instability in the Middle East has compelled completely also rewritten the security calculus of the Gulf states. Each country has to now individually buy more defense equipment, and of course they have to diversify as well. And that actually brings us to some fascinating news we just heard last week about this massive deal, multi-billion-dollar deal, defense deal between UAE and India. And this this deal include also this India's premier BrahMos supersonic missiles, of course, with some very advanced Indian system. So I think that deal is a huge milestone if you look at it. it's another, of course, a major stamp of quality for the Indian defense sector, which has actually been showing a very interesting upward trend ever since the October 7th. So we're not the only one who's benefiting for that. I think that also helped India. And I think by adding India to this, defense portfolio partners, I think the UAE gained a more diverse supply base, but it also gave it its strategic autonomy that all these countries are looking for. And of course, it also puts UAE in a better position with the United States, because it still, put it in the, they still support the West. It's good the US support this India. So they're kind of in the same axis. So it's not like buying Chinese or Russian defense equipment. So that also another element for that. I think for India, of course, this is a big moment. For years, the Modi government has been pushing for the Make in India initiative, specifically in the defense sector, trying to transition India from just the world's largest arms importers into a major global exporter of defense equipment. So I think this crisis and this massive UA deal definitely will help them, and that's validate that strategy. And I think we will see this defense industry and the domestic defense industry will sign much more deals with the Gulf states. So I think if we need to look at it and conclude, I think the crisis has proven that India is no longer just a passive bystander to the global conflict or global geopolitics. It also proved that the Indian economy is deeply connected with the global checkpoints, with the global economy. And I think if we want to look at what will happen in the Indian economy and how exactly this crisis will impact it, I think we still need to wait at least 6 months. I think this economic shock of the Iran war is still on the horizon, and that will be revealed in at least 6 months. So that's it.
Oshrit, thank you so very much for a very comprehensive review with a strong and very relevant economic dimension. And thank you particularly because amidst the negative aspects of the crisis for India, you've been able to point also to opportunities. I think this is supposed to be an old Chinese observation that the crisis also involves more aspects of opportunity, even in the way the characters are written. And this is a good segue to Mr. Wang Shuangcheng's presentation. He has written for JISS before on aspects of China's policy, with a strong emphasis again on the economic dimension. And over to you, Mr. Wang.
Thank you. So nice to join the conference. I would like to prepare 4 subjects. The number one, Chinese government warmly welcome the MOU finalized, but they worried about 6 days after. Why? Because China itself has its own crisis economically. The employment now about 13 to 14%, out of the age around 20. And the product surplus make job very difficult. Also, the lost a lot of money in the One Belt One Road. I mean, the initiative in the Middle East, because the war in Russia, so all more the business stopped. They lost $1 billion. Now, all of a sudden, the agreement signed is good chance for China. That's why they fully hope to finalize at the end, so that China can get rid of the mud from this new chance. Therefore, from the Chinese government point of view, Iran is the key point. So you can see from Medium, all of a sudden, before they also keep a very close contact with Iran, secretly, publicly, maybe you know. But now they openly to breach the connection with Iran. So I just noticed the vice chairman of China Parliament is going to visit to participate to the Iran head's funerals. So that shocked everybody. So all of a sudden you can see in this world, Russia is going down. China looks very reluctantly to go ahead. So you nearly cannot see something from the medium. But for Middle East, from Iran, it's very hot because the China has to import about 14% of the oil from of the country from India, from Iran. I can see about 90%. It comes to 1.36 million barrels per day. So that's the biggest economic appeal for Chinese government. That's why they want to keep this agreement signed and get this Hormuz Strait open, so China can get a very big benefit. That's why the Chinese government is very excited about the next step. So one side they're concerned, another side they are ready to go ahead, because in domestic market today, you may see it's not like the medium side. It's a little bit sad for most people. So in this way, they want to keep the Hormuz Strait open to get cheaper and reliable oil. Otherwise, China has a big problem. For that one, they intensified the connection out of history to Iran to keep the line hot. Meanwhile, they also initiate the both sides agreed a very big business plan. They call the 25-year plan, means a comprehensive business development plan between the two countries. Because of this Iran war is stopped. Now China hope it can come back. They have enough money and labor force to go ahead in the Middle East. Again, in China, they used to rely on the real estate business. Now it's going down. The people getting off. So if you go to Beijing, you can see Beijing very, very quiet. People looking for the chance. The whole country, the whole people waiting for the moment to have the agreement signed and peacefully for business development forever. So everybody exciting. Meanwhile, China try to be a bigger boss, to play the bigger boss. So they give the Indian government, they give the United Nations, or give to Iran government a lot of instructions or their intention to go ahead and hope whatever they say, whatever they do with one purpose, to keep the region in the Middle East safe, so China can develop their own business with Iran, also with other Saudi Arabia countries. On the other hand, because I'm deeply involved for Israeli business, because these days, because of conflict with Lebanon, the Chinese government, I can see, decided to downgrade with Israel, and but they just keep diplomatic relationship, but in one word, no more business. They want to wait until the day when the agreement finally signed, when the after war conflict started, and then China will come back to Israel for cooperation. So my colleagues, my previous friends involved in business in Israel, more or less slow down. So for that one, even so, China want to play the big role in international market, and in May, they initiate a big plan. They call it Global Guarantee Initiative, means try to play the big roles to moderate, to coordinate the conflict in China in the world, but only in one word. Whatever they do, only for one. Very clear. China is very objective. For business going down, to release the high tension politically and civilly in China. So let's see, because I prepared 8 pages, so you give me 10 minutes, I cannot finish it. So that is more or less the core point I want to see. Thank you.
I think we may have some time for questions. I can try to relate to the American aspect in all of this if it's necessary, but let's focus on the contributions of Oshrit and of Shuangcheng in terms of what this conflict has brought about for these two Asian superpowers. Do we have do we have any questions?
Do you have any questions? I can answer you.
Yeah, well, can you hear me?
Hi. Welcome. I thought you were off mic.
Good to see you.
General Kuperwasser.
Sorry for this technical problem that kept me from moderating this debate, but now that I'm back, I missed the first part of it, so I don't know what you said, Eran, and I hope that you not refer to the question of the wars competition between the great powers. Is that?
Well, I just mentioned that this has three aspects: the military impact, the closure of the Hormuz, and the question of control of Iranian taking away Iran's delusion that they can control the region. And over to Oshrit and to.
So I would like to hear your point and everybody else's about the question: to what extent what happened here affects the great power competition between especially China and the United States, and how the Middle East fits into this competition after the war. Now,
I would very quickly say that I started with this famous saying attributed to Zhou Enlai and the French Revolution. It's too early to tell. Certainly, we don't know how this ends. It may still. The conflict may still revive. The MOU may have unexpected problems. It could lead to a successful project for the United States denuclearizing Iran, and it could lead to the more or less the opposite, a significant failure. The immediate impression, of course, is that the United States has suffered a setback, that it by avoiding military action, avoiding the use of military force to open the Hormuz Straits and deal with the Iranian nuclear, with what is left of the Iranian nuclear project, it has demonstrated a reluctance to act as a superpower to act, and this may well be reflected in the manner in which it is perceived in most importantly in Beijing, but also elsewhere. And we may add to this what others, Chinese, the Indians, and the Russians may draw, the conclusions that they may draw, watching other players in the region, like Saudi Arabia and Erdogan's Turkey, put a distance between them and the Americans in looking for a local alignment of forces with Pakistan, perhaps as a strategic nuclear anchor. For it, quite a troubling development of the last few months. We were all focused on the war itself, but the emergence of this grouping, this alignment, is highly troubling. Oshrit has mentioned, of course, the Indian discomfort, to put it mildly, at the rise of Pakistan, to the role of a key regional player working side by side with the Qataris and with the Turks and the Saudis in the background, as a mediator accepted by the United States as a legitimate and leading mediator. All of this is quite problematic. But the game is far from over. The U.S. Side by side with Israel still has some very significant cards to play and tools to use. We saw this with the reversal of the position in Lebanon, from offering Iran a key role in navigating the future of Lebanon to an MOU very quickly after the Iranian MOU, which basically puts Iran out of the equation and consigns their proxies to disarmament. I don't know if it would be implemented. We have our grave doubts. But it indicated that in Washington there has been a wake-up call. to the consequences of the Iranian MOU in terms of not only American power, but also American prestige and American standing in international affairs. And Israel, of course, is a junior partner in this game, but we are reminded of what Napoleon once said, that there's only one thing worse than fighting alongside allies is fighting without them. And having a significant ally at play has its costs, very significant costs, particularly when our interests are not entirely aligned. But nevertheless, I go back to the military dimension. The absolute technological superiority demonstrated by the American-Israeli combination of forces, I think also has a lot of lessons to be learned for other players in the international arena. I think the double impact in military, in terms of the military balance of power, of these events, as well as the Ukraine war and its the manner in which it has evolved, I think will be studied very carefully, and above all, I believe, by decision makers in Beijing when they have to make their own call on the possible use of force on issues that matter to them. Above all, of course, the future of Taiwan. So the demonstration of absolute military superiority is a freestanding aspect of the situation, but it did not suffice to bring Iran to the necessary conclusions. And in fact, the Iranians have very effectively used the limited but destructive capacity to disrupt the world trade and the world economy in order to try and obtain a better result. And how this is navigated in the next few weeks and the next few months, to be precise, I think will have a major impact on how the United States is perceived internationally.
Which is actually, Ron, a good question, because everyone talks about this alignment if India is joining the Western axis, and I think if India is watching what just happened between Israel and United States, and that actually raised much more pressure on the Indian government to stay not aligned, to with less engagement and less I think public support when it comes to aligning publicly with the United States, so India will be cautious when it comes to that, of course. I think that what will happen as well is that India will open new channels of engagement with China. I think that also will be something that we will see happening in the future. And of course, if we look at India's relationship with the Gulf, I think, of course, China is there. But compared to China, I think India's currency is stronger. If it's not just the money and investment, and we know about the great relationship and the trade partnership India shared with the United Arab Emirates, but also India has its religious ties with the Gulf. It has its cultural ties with the Gulf. So India will try to capitalize it for sure and try to sell the Gulf whatever they need. And we also need to remember, we talk about the Gulf relations with India, but it's not just India dependent on the Gulf countries. It's also now that the Gulf is becoming more dependent on India. The Gulf countries trying to diversify from its oil and gas, and they are heavily investing in India. So that pattern will actually, what they saw with the United States, I think will push them to invest more in India in the next future. And I think that definitely what we're going to see. And of course, maybe new engagement with China. Another important thing which I want to mention, and I did mention, which is the Chabahar port, which is a major important, transit hub for India. That India is investing to. It's a gateway to Central Asia, to Afghanistan, try to bypass Pakistan, less be reliant on the Chinese route. And I think when it comes to that, the question, what will happen if in the next 60 days, and what kind of agreement US will achieve with Iran will have an implication on the Chabahar project, which is definitely not really moving forward for the last few years. And India is heavily invested. I think they invested maybe $80 million dollars so far. So they're waiting to see what will happen, because definitely this is, of course, if we talk about India's economies and India's connectivity project, this is a major, an important corridor that part of the INFTC, the North-South corridor, which connects India and will ship Indian goods from to Europe. So I think that will have implications on the Chabahar port, which we'll definitely need to see what will happen. But if it will happen, and America will have a deal and a deal with Iran in a way that will stabilize the region, I think that Chabahar project will be on the map and on a table again. So yeah.
So Wang, what do you think about the implications for the great power competition? Isn't China the main winner of this conflict so far?
It looks at the behind, they try to be the winner. We talk about MOU, we talk about the Hormuz Strait, we talk about the relationship with Iran. They are so close to each other in order to get rid of this current problem in domestic market, also in domestic political issues. So I can see the picture is clear. China used to be very close with Russia. As you can see now, Russia stepped down, is feeding off. Now China want to go the others with Iran. They have kept good connection with Iran for more than 30 years. If you talk about concessions, China still doing something on the table to continue to cooperate with Iran, because China doesn't have enough crude oil for their daily consumptions. So Iran, because the price is cheap, because economically is very close to China, so in one way, whatever they do, only keep one sentence: to keep the oil safe, to keep the Hormuz Strait open. That's the Chinese bottom line. Whatever they do, they decorate by diplomatic issues is less important. So that is the heart. Whatever they do, they only keep this one. Meanwhile, they try to play something in the United Nations. As you can see, they condemn Israel because the conflict with Lebanon, all these stories. So as you can see, they very much increase, hug the Iran and cool down with Israel. Meanwhile, to keep a good connection with other Gulf countries for their big investment, for their big release of the domestic market and politics.
Yes, they also expect to be able to invest a lot in Iran once the reconstruction begins.
They never stop.
So
that's true.
well, when we talk about a fund of $300 billion that is going to be provided to the Iranians by the Gulf states, according to this MOU, much of this money may end up, when the Americans say it's going to go to America, but in fact, much of this money may end up in China, doesn't it?
You are right. According to information, actually this money kept by CCTV. No, CITIC group.
Mm-hmm.
During the Cold War, they still hold on the money, $30 to $40 billion. It's frozen money. Now the money freeze. So China have a big chance to use the money to intensify the more investment, more business. That's the winner, actually, I can see.
Yes.
India is less in compared with China in winning. Iran and China are the biggest winner from this MOU, as you can see.
Mhm.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
What?
But we have some opportunities. We're definitely,
Well,
I
I
hope
think
so. Yeah.
and we're looking forward to expand,
Yep.
leverage them. So yeah.
I think the
So-
picture is that India is going to try to make the best of the opportunities it has, but China has a much bigger opening for investment in Iran and for investment in China by Gulf states and by Iran itself. So the bigger winner is China, not India.
You're right.
Yeah. I agree.
And then beyond of that, what was said here about the lessons learned about the American might, military might, are important. The Americans have shown their capabilities. It's definitely something that was watched very carefully in Beijing, but at the same time, the resilience of the Americans, the readiness to sacrifice was limited, and everybody could have seen how sensitive and vulnerable they are to the market situation. So if the market is going to be hit by any future conflict, then China, who has a much better system to withstand something like that, is in a position to gain more. And, that's something that I'm sure that the Chinese and the Indians and everybody else took into account.
Well, as I said, the jury is still out, but there are already significant lessons that we could have learned from what we've heard.
Yeah. Okay, if there are no more questions, then we can call it a webinar. Any more questions?
I don't see any on my
I don't have questions.
monitor. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you, Oshrit. Thank you.